I also would like to add an acknowledgement of the lands on which we're all meeting today. I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people in Melbourne today, and I particularly like the fact that it is Warring season, which is wombat season, between April and July, and that's when the wombats begin to seek what sunshine there is and forage for food and nourishment. And I think that that's quite a nice message for all of us, as particularly as we're all sitting in front of a screen for time today. So when we do get the chance to go out and seek a bit of daylight and nourishment, I think that's a great message for all of us. For those of you that don't know a huge amount about Dementia Australia, where we have a few different hats, as Marie mentioned, I have been involved in quite a few different elements of what we do at Dementia Australia. We are the peak advocacy organisation for dementia in Australia for people living with all forms of dementia of all ages. We also run a whole range of services that are delivered all around the country, both virtually and face to face. And we also deliver education to healthcare services as well. I suspect that some of what I'm going to start with is reinforcing messaging we've already heard. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because we've heard already from Alyssa and others that focusing on particular messaging, tasks, activities, and doing that over a period of time is a good thing. So I'm going to add to some of the messages that we've already heard around dementia and brain health and reablement. And I think that there's a really important focus that we've already heard through some of our previous speakers today, which is that despite the evidence that there is great impact in using reablement style approaches to dementia care, it is still very sporadically offered in practical care and support for people living with dementia. And that's despite the fact that a lot of people are interested in what they can do to keep their brains healthy. And all of you seem to be very much across the risk factors for uh, decreasing the risk of developing dementia in the first place. But a lot of people out there don't necessarily know very much about that, nor do they know how to apply it in a practical sense. So we did a survey fairly recently, and 86% of respondents were interested in what they could do to support brain health. But almost a third of them thought that there was nothing that they could do to reduce their risk of developing dementia in the first place. So there is still this misunderstanding around conversations about dementia, but then also conversations about what proactive care and support could look like. And a lot of people don't necessarily think about brain health as being something that can be influenced once someone has a diagnosis of dementia. We still hear all too often that somebody that is diagnosed with dementia is given the information, given the news that they have a cognitive impairment, and then basically told to sort of, go and muddle through as best they can until things get difficult and then come back and see us. And so there's a whole chunk that's missing from care and support for people that are diagnosed with dementia. So that means that, and we've already heard this really clearly, that it means that people don't understand what reablement is. And of course, the word reablement, I mean, it's a, it's a bit of a funny thing that we're all sitting in a conference that is focused on reablement, but it's a word that actually doesn't resonate with most of the people that we're talking to and working with. So that's already a barrier, and we know that language can be incredibly important. So applying the concepts of reablement, I think, is probably a better way of putting it, and looking at what that means in relation to brain health isn't well understood out in the community. And that's, before a diagnosis or after a diagnosis. And what we hear too often from people that are living with dementia and their families and carers is that they don't know what they don't know. So they're kind of they're reliant on all of us as service providers and holders of information about the healthcare and disability and aged care systems to support them in a practical way that they can understand, and to ask the sorts of questions and offer the sorts of solutions that can make a difference, because somebody that is newly diagnosed with dementia probably isn't going to think, now I wonder what reablement services I should be tapping into. There's very low likelihood, even if somebody's from a healthcare background or, that they're necessarily going to be thinking in those ways. So as service providers, it's really important that we're able to demystify some of those words and what they mean in a practical sense. And of course, we have seen from Lee Fay and from Alyssa earlier today that while dementia is a progressive condition, the brain does retain the ability to adapt and continue to adapt even during the progression of dementia. So that really means that then brain health is important across the lifespan for all of us, and that principles of reablement are key to not only aging well, but also being able to live as well as we can after a diagnosis of dementia. So, when it comes to wellness and reablement and looking at, oops, sorry, I've gone too far there. When we're looking at how to apply that into practice, basically what that means is that there is a focus on growth and learning and meaningful living right throughout the trajectory of dementia, that care plans and support plans and behavior support plans are all able to focus on strengths, on someone's independence, on their interests. And we've, just heard from Daniela so beautifully about how that can be applied in a practical sense, not least around, how somebody might be responding or behaving or demonstrating their reaction to a given environment and the messages that they're trying to send by that, but also making sure that independence interests is at the heart of even things like, mobility aids, as we heard from Alyssa earlier. We also know from research, but also from practical impacts that people living with dementia have told us about, that simple adaptations and assistive technologies can make a difference in prolonging independence, especially when they are adopted early. And that modifiable risk factors are not only a way of delaying dementia, but they could also slow the progression. I think there's still, evolving evidence about that. But given the lack of significant disease modifying treatments in the field currently, other than, a couple of MABs that focus particularly on reducing the levels of amyloid in the brain. So they're targeting a particular protein and therefore having the most impact on Alzheimer's disease. In lieu of there being any other significant impacts, modifiable risk factors are really an effective way of looking at slowing the progression. And we know that reablement practices or reablement theories can be viewed and applied as valid treatments, not only for people as they age, but also for people who are living with cognitive impairments. So there's a few things that we need to look at in terms of being able to apply that into practice. And I've separated it out into three different categories here because I think that they all do play a role in how we consider applying reablement to the instance of somebody living with dementia. And that's to do with attitudes, both at a society level and perhaps at an individual level, our knowledge and how to apply it, and then the practical application and how we do that in a consistent way that means that we are changing practice more broadly. So I'll start with attitudes, and I think it's unfortunate, but I'm going to put it out there that our attitudes to aging are one of the significant barriers that we have to being able to deploy reablement principles more consistently, not only for older people, but particularly for older people who are living with a cognitive impairment. It's like the intersection of two elements of stigma, and it does tangibly impact the way that care and support is offered in our communities today. So the World Health Organization describes healthy aging as the process of developing and maintaining functional ability that enables well-being in older age. And that's underpinned by making sure that there's early intervention, which is just a fancy way of saying that where services and supports might be useful in making a positive difference to somebody, that they're offered early rather than at a point of crisis or when there's an injury that needs to be managed. That there is individual self-management with shared decision making, so that there's a kind of a group approach to providing care and support, and that there is multidisciplinary care planning that is able to uh, span a whole range of disciplines in the medical and healthcare field and allied health field that wraps around that individual. But we know, all of us, I'm sure, that there is a sense in older age treatments and supports that older people are not as worthwhile in investing in when it comes to supporting functional abilities. And it's an uncomfortable truth in our society. So there is that sense that older people all too often, I certainly hear from family members who are nurses that trying to get someone a referral for a hip replacement when they're in their 80s and have that be prioritized is difficult in a healthcare system that is already overloaded. So there is that sense of ageism there that that it is better to invest in younger people rather than investing in somebody that's older. And where we get the kind of even more pointy sense of discrimination is when somebody also has a cognitive impairment. So there is that sense, go home, get your affairs in order, and we'll see you when things get tough. And that's really doing an enormous disservice, not only to our society and community, but also to individuals and their right to have care and support. And, we've already heard from some of our previous speakers about the importance of human rights and thinking about human rights when it comes to care and support for people living with dementia. And unfortunately, people still report to us all the time that there is a significant stigma with a diagnosis of dementia. And I think some of Daniela's language around, talking about a brain under attack perhaps is a great way of starting to challenge some of that, because people living with dementia that we've spoken to will frequently report that there's been reduction in their social inclusion, that they lose confidence in wanting to go out because they're less confident about moving around their own environment or their local community. And so they withdraw from activities because there's fear or of judgment or embarrassment about not being able to respond in the way that they used to. Globally, we've seen that about 65% of healthcare professionals incorrectly believe that dementia is a normal part of aging, which is quite terrifying when you consider that we've been talking about dementia and raising awareness of dementia for a really long time. And globally, that's up to about 80% of the general public also believe that it's a normal part of aging. So there's some really significant challenges that we have in this space that I think is incumbent on all of us to challenge that, because in the same way that we might be saying that oh, they're responding that way because of dementia, actually that's that, as we've already heard from Daniela, is a disservice to that person and to their experience of dementia. So it's really important that that we start to tackle some of that thought process. We've already heard from Lee Fay and others, and all of you were really strong in naming all of the modifiable risk factors for dementia. And I think it's important that we think about our modifiable risk factors in the context of reducing our risk of developing dementia, but actually focusing on our brain health And it may not be phrased in that way, right? Like we've, heard about the wanky language. We don't want to sort of talk to people about brain health if it's something that doesn't really resonate or land as a practical uh, implication to do something. But we do know that the factors around brain health, those modifiable risk factors, can form the backbone, and in fact do often form the backbone of a reablement focus. And we've already heard from Alyssa about the impact of exercise and how that can make a tangible uh, shift in somebody's care and support as they age, including when they have a cognitive impairment. And that also then has flow on effects for some of the other modifiable risk factors, because if somebody is going out and, for example, Alyssa's example of the gentleman going out with his mobility aid meant that his social isolation was being tackled. So there's often a kind of flow on impact of how some of these things can work together. So then practical application, there's a couple of things there that we've already heard and that I will reinforce, which is that starting early is really important. And I don't think we hear that enough, because often those that are being engaged and focusing might be already uh, above average in terms of seeking uh, in their sort of healthcare seeking. Um, they might be more proactive in thinking and seeking information about what can make a difference to them. So we really need to build a healthcare system that is able to get people into concepts of reablement early on, to think about brain health early on, not at the point at which things are starting to really significantly decline or reach a crisis point. I think we've also heard beautifully from our previous speakers about the importance of strength based approaches to care, not deficit focused ones. Thinking about what people can do, building on what they can do, focusing on the things that matter to them, focusing on the things that they want to maintain or relearn, and moving those conversations away from wanky academic speak about reablement to making it more practical and understandable around that person and their priorities and goals is really important. It's also important to focus on doing with and not for. And I know that that is something that probably all of you are focused on, and it's not as easy to implement as it could be. There's the sense that, oh, you sit down, I'll make you a cup of tea, or there's that, which is coming from great intentions, and all of us have probably done it at one point or another, because it's easier to take the steps of preparing tea or coffee, or helping someone with picking out their clothing, or other day-to-day activities. It could be easier and quicker to do it that way. But actually, there is far more of an impact in supporting someone's independence and their confidence and agency by having that more shared decision-making approach and enabling people to make decisions where they're able to. Targeting modifiable risk factors at every stage of life is actually really important, as I've already said, and often they have connections to one another. So, thinking of them as everyday kind of treatments or interventions or services is actually a really helpful way of breaking down what people can do. Because, like all of us, if you say you need to keep your brain healthy and then give a long list of things that people have to do, trying to apply that knowledge to day-to-day life and think about how it can be translated into everyday practices is quite intimidating, and so it might be off-putting. Whereas breaking it down into achieving goals in the way that Alyssa talked about with the gentleman walking his dog, they're the sorts of things that can make a difference. We also know that early, simple environmental adaptations can make an enormous difference to people's confidence in living in their own homes, and we saw some of those from Lee Fay, and normalizing proactivity and possibility. So, looking at having real conversations with people about, what they can and can't achieve, and framing things in a way that is based on possibility. So there's something always to work towards because, like anyone, if we set our mind to, I don't know, learning a new musical instrument or deciding to, I don't run 5 kilometers or do a half marathon. Those are things that are never one and done. Once we've done them, then there's another possibility, there's another option. So once we, learn the basic chords of a guitar, for example, it doesn't mean that we go, okay, well, I'm done and, step away from that. So there is that kind of ongoing optimism about what comes next. And also the importance of multidisciplinary support. I think, today's agenda is a really powerful reminder for all of us that there are so many different healthcare professions and disciplines that can make a difference to people's care and support. And it's not just about medical care or psychosocial care or allied health. It's actually about all of those things and so much more. So they're all really important in working together. So in terms of sort of breaking that down into some of the ways that they can be applied, starting with social connection, because it is one of the most significant risk factors for older people in particular, and it is also one of the most challenging risk factors for people after a diagnosis of dementia. And social connection, as we know, not only improves self-esteem and confidence, but it also reduces isolation. It combats some of the impacts of depression and potentially could slow the progression of cognitive decline. So, focusing on what somebody wants to do or what they might like to relearn to do in a broadest possible sense of their well-being, whether that be physical, mental, environmental, or social, is really important. And looking at how to break that down into something that's going to be meaningful to the person. So if you, talk to somebody and they've never been particularly socially engaged. They don't like big groups of people. They have impaired hearing, and their hearing aids are great, but they elevate all of the noise equally in a room, which means that when there's multiple conversations going on, it can be quite difficult for them to concentrate. Thinking about a group-based program might not necessarily be the most effective thing for them, but a peer support program, something that connects in, one to one, something that is based on a particular interest, like going to a particular group that focuses on I don't know, a craft or playing a particular instrument or singing, where there's a targeted approach to focused conversation. Those are the sorts of things that might resonate more for somebody and support them to be more socially engaged. And there are lots of different community-based services and supports that can make a difference to somebody living with a cognitive impairment. Peer support programs are a great way of either providing group-based peer support or individual peer support, where somebody can bounce off somebody else to understand how they've managed in a particular way and get ideas from one another. So there's a whole range of applications that can make a difference there. The physical environment, as we've heard already, makes an enormous difference, and it can ensure that people feel more confident and comfortable moving around their own homes. That there are visual prompts that can help them, whether that be using labels and signage, whether it be using apps that can remind people, augmented virtual reality glasses are becoming a bit more of a thing, and also really simple things like home modifications that can make an enormous difference to someone's confidence in moving around their home. There's a whole range of assistive technologies out there that can make a difference, and some simple changes to the home environment around a bit of decluttering, making sure that there's not trip hazards, making sure that there's not really busy patterns that can add to visual disturbances. These are all things that can make a significant difference. And the good thing is that you can supplement services with additional supports that can work alongside other funding types. So, for example, we have an at home with dementia program at Dementia Australia, which is a OT led program for individualized consultation with people living in their own homes, and we can do a virtual walk through their house with them and make recommendations that can help support independence. So there's lots of different supports out there that can make tangible shifts in the physical environment. I think we've already heard far more eloquently from Alyssa than I around the impact of physical exercise. And, I think it's one of those things that all of us know it's good for us. And sometimes it can be really difficult to motivate ourselves to do it. In fact, at the break before, I was thinking, I've only got 15 minutes. I need to plow through a couple of emails before we come back to the session. But I made myself get up and go and get some fresh air and, see the outside for 5 minutes and go for a quick walk. And it makes an enormous difference. So we know that it's good for us. And so sometimes it is about, finding ways and finding points of motivation for individuals to build that into day-to-day activity. And we've seen the impact that it can have on positive mental health, and also the way that it can build confidence in moving around the environment, moving around the local neighborhood, the impact that it can have on reducing the risk of falls, of strengthening muscles. And often exercise is something that becomes a social activity. And so that can also then have flow on effects for building more inclusive environments and communities that are, more familiar with people that are living with cognitive impairment, moving out and around in the local community, and also creates that sense of social engagement. So that's, all of which are strong positives. We also, of course, know that exercising our brains is really important, and that can look like lots of different things depending on who you are as an individual and how dementia or cognitive impairment may be impacting you. And so, the sorts of things that are really important and improve neuroplasticity for one person won't necessarily look the same for another. And we've heard from Lee Fay around the different types of cognitive exercise, cognitive training, and cognitive stimulation therapy that can make a difference. And we do often hear from people living with dementia that things that are based in experience can be less stressful and elicit less of a stress response than things that have right or wrong answers to them. Having said that, if somebody is a real demon for puzzles or for learning complex pieces of choral music or playing instruments, or that they see as particularly engaging and challenging. For me, any of those things I would find incredibly stressful, and I don't think they would elicit the right response. But for somebody else, they might be really powerful. So making sure that it is very much grounded in a person's preferences and interests, and thinking about experiential uh, based activities is great, and then thinking about how that could potentially link to other services. So it's really taking a broader approach to what service delivery could look like. Cognitive stimulation therapy is something that Lee Fay mentioned earlier, that it is, an evolving evidence base, that it's non-pharmacological, and it does have some really lovely impacts for people, not only from a social engagement point of view, but also for improving executive functioning and communication. And we've seen that it can slow cognitive decline, particularly in mild and moderate stages of dementia. It can actually improve language skills and word finding. It has a positive impact on quality of life. And it means that there's actually a whole range of ways that we can use sort of structured or semi structured themed activities that can stimulate thinking and memory and language and executive functioning. And that means that it's important to ground cognitive stimulation therapy in experience, not tests. So, again, it's based on experiential conversation and engagement, not so much right or wrong answers to things. And there's been some great work done in the ACT with a researcher, Nathan DeCuna, who's done some great work in the SPICE project around cognitive stimulation therapy, and we also know that there's lots of CST providers out in the community, and Dementia Australia is actually looking at implementing a pilot in CST to see how we can build that into some of our work, because the evidence base is so compelling. We've heard already that nutrition is really important, and sleep is kind of like the unofficial 15th risk factor, I think, for dementia. I suspect that, the evidence base will progress to a point where the Lancet does add that to the collection. But they're both really important in terms of sleep hygiene, in terms of how that impacts and has a flow on relationship to mood and memory function. All of us have been there where we've had a crappy night's sleep, and then our ability to function cognitively is definitely impaired the day after. And it means that the ability to balance, the ability to regulate mood, all of those things can be impacted. So having a focus on that and making sure that some of the aspects of a reablement plan or a care plan or a behavior management plan, the words that we use, in our planning world, but that may sound different to someone that you're working with, are really important to make sure that there's a focus. And for somebody that has a particular passion for food or an interest around food, using that to then spur engagement with social services and social supports and engagement can make a huge difference as well. And of course, the multidisciplinary care. And this is something that I think everybody is always very consistent in agreeing with, but it seems to be the hardest thing for us to all be able to embed in practical application. And that's partly because of the systems that we work in are so fragmented and tend to treat people's care so separately in lots of different veins. You've got, kind of the medical care, and then that's divided up into primary care and hospital care, and that's different and treated differently from psychosocial care. All of those things can be incredibly fragmented, and it means that all of us have to be very mindful of how we pull teams of people around somebody to support them through all of their different challenges, and the sorts of things that they can achieve. I've popped up there some resources. We've already heard about some of them today, and I think we can add that to the blog that we've heard about from Alyssa and Daniela's web um, page and LinkedIn contacts. Forward with Dementia. There's a whole range of information out there that helps people look at how to practically apply some of these senses. And of course, Dementia Australia has the National Dementia Helpline, which is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, not just for people living with dementia and their families and carers, but also for healthcare professionals as well. Um, Now, I've seen Marie pop up on my screen. So I think I was going to run through a case study, but I think probably I've made the points of how some of the different principles that sit behind a reablement focus can make a difference to somebody living with dementia. We've got just a very brief case study there that shows how some of those elements were woven together to support Maria and John and the outcome that that had. So I will leave it there.
Fabulous. Thanks, Cal. And it was great to have that case study up for people just have a quick read through of the engagement that's accessible through Dementia Australia and, proudly funded by the Australian government as well to be delivering with no charge for those supports for people living with dementia and carers. And we had a lot of chat going on around that real praise for that notion of with and not for, but also recognition of the challenge of that. And I think you
Yep.
really highlighted that well, that it's sometimes, it's in our nature. And I know I'm guilty of this too. It's a lot easier sometimes to step in. And
Absolutely.
I love it when people with dementia tell me to step out. I think, tell me more. And of course, the importance of knowing the person. I feel like I'm going to get that tattooed on my body somewhere. But I did have a question that came up during the session about the at-home program and the assessments with the OT, whether it was only by telehealth. There's no ability for that to be face to face, but telehealth is a good option.
Yeah, unfortunately, at this stage, it is only available via telehealth because we've only got a very small team of occupational therapists. So getting them around the country would be a bit of a challenge. But it has proven to be a really successful program, even via a screen of walking around with a phone to show footage of the house and the some of the solutions have been, really helpful in helping people. And the idea about behind that is that they're low cost, no cost interventions. So it's not about, redesigning your entire house or replacing every single piece of furniture. It's about thinking, practically about how can the environment be made a little bit more enabling for somebody.
And there are usually some really easy, simple things we can do to
Yeah.
make the environment better. And the referral process, just hop on your website.
Up on the website or contact the National Dementia Helpline on 1-800-100-500, and they'll connect you through to the program.
Such an easy number to remember. It's embedded in my brain, and people ask me, and I can reel it off like that along with the DSA numbers. So it's still those numbers that never go away. And I think we should be really grateful for the funding we get to deliver these services across
Absolutely.
Australia. So a couple of other questions on there that the KeepAble team have said we'll answer post this session. But thanks, Kaele, for joining us and sharing the great work that Dementia Australia do across Australia. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody.